Hey everyone, we're live talking to you from the intersection of Montgomery and Bucks County here, which you've heard a lot about in the news. We've never been more famous. We feel so famous, you know. We're driving around outside the bypass, which is right outside our house. It's just like everything is. It's just funny to like see it, like, you know, Montgomery County and then Lehigh County, which is where my daughter goes to college, which is the next county over. Is
now,
also
now you've told everybody where you live, Ek.
People know where I live. My house is surrounded by, you know, adoring fans every day, every day. Anyway,
pre-show.
Something to say. It's a bad transition. Back now to Russ Cohen with something different.
Yeah, I learned about the passing of somebody that wrote about in our book, 100 Ranger Grades, Jim Neilson. His nickname was Chief because he was of Aboriginal descent. I only saw him briefly as a player, but he was part of that 72 Cup team. But having talked to John Halligan a lot when we were ranking the players, his name would come up a lot because as a defenseman, he played for 13 years, 811 games. So he clearly was a defense partner for a lot of Rangers. And then he even was a captain of like the Golden Seals after, and he's in the Saskatchewan Hall of Fame, but a really great player. Like you would still categorize him as a defensive defenseman, but he did have like 10 goals one year. There were some years where he had some points, but most of the time when John would talk about him would be about his toughness. This guy was just a competitor. He never missed games and very beloved. Like a lot of Rangers families are hurting today. Like they love this guy. Like he was just salt of the earth kind of guy. So, you know, just want to pay my respects.
Yeah. He was one of those players for that era. He was sort of epitomized what they wanted out of a defenseman. Like he was really tough.
Yeah.
Like he would just never back down at all. And was a really good one-on-one defender. And, you know, you didn't have toasting the defenseman on, one-on-one like we did when after Bossy showed up and suddenly showed everyone how to do it.
Right.
And then for a while, for several years, you know, that's all you ever saw is the guy trying to beat the defenseman one-on-one. But, you know, he rarely got beat. But the other thing I remember is that everybody always said that he always stood up for all of his teammates. And, you know, whenever there was a skirmish, he was always had his nose in it, so it was
just looking at his statistics to talk about from one end of the spectrum to the other. Let's see, where was it? In 71-72, when the Rangers went to the final against Boston, he was a plus 38. In 74-75 with the California Seals, he was minus 45.
And he was the captain for them.
Yeah, which just goes to show you how important plus minus is.
Right.
Now, I just want to bring this up for baseball.
I'm gonna get a drink.
All right, so one more thing. So he was paired a lot with Rod Steele. So anything that I know Russ wrote about it in his book, but the other piece is, so the Hockey News just came out with their top 100 defensemen of all time. And granted, you could disagree with a lot of the rankings, but Sealing was ranked in the top 100 towards the bottom part of that list, which is a pretty good indication that others recognize the value of just how good he was. And started, I think that's kind of like when it came out, people who were Ranger fans who may not have realized or didn't read Russ's book started to kind of get a sense of him. And now, obviously, with his unfortunate passing, hopefully a lot more people realize just how solid of a blue liner he was in that era for that team.
Yeah, that's well put because he definitely gave Sealing room out there to operate.
And Rod Sealing was part of that great Andy Bathgate trade in '64. Just one baseball thing that we can get started here. Again, I've beaten Major League Baseball over the head because of their treating of the Houston Astros cheating scandal. And today is another example of how ridiculous the penalties were because the Boston Red Sox rehired Alex Cora after he had been suspended for a year. Major League Baseball, I mean, there's enough embarrassment with the Justin Turner thing, with things that happened during the season, with the impending labor strife that's going to happen because the CBA is up after the next season. This is the biggest embarrassment, and the Astros basically got off scot-free because they didn't have to play in front of fans because of the pandemic. And next year it'll probably be in the rearview mirror. But it's a joke what Major League Baseball did for a scandal that is akin to the Black Sox scandal. That all they did was fine a team, suspend people for a year, not banning them for baseball. It's a joke, and Alex Cora being rehired is a freaking joke.
I disagree with you because I think the year ban was a pretty substantive ban.
Yeah.
What I will give you, Michael, is another one is, and it's a team that's near and dear to your heart. You remember when Steinbrenner was banned for paying off a noted gambler to dig up dirt on Dave Winfield.
Yeah.
How long was he suspended for?
4 or 5 years.
Okay. That was an owner suspended for 4 years. A little different than a guy whose livelihood comes from being a manager behind the bench who was suspended a full season. Granted, they should have done a lot more, I think, to Houston, but I think guys like Corey and Hinch did pay a decent price in terms of the suspension. Granted, I think they should have had a better shot at getting back than the GM because the GM showed no contrition when he had his commentary, and I think he's going to have a bit harder of a time getting back into the game.
Was Carlos Beltran? You think Carlos Beltran?
I think Beltran will get back. I think he took a lion's share of the issue because he was kind of a little bit more heavily involved to a certain extent of what went on. I do think that he eventually will get a look. I think the proof is going to be is whether or not he gets into the Hall of Fame and the timing therein. If he doesn't get in initially or at all, this whole scandal is the reason why he doesn't get in.
Well, I don't know about that, but I think he's going to be waiting on both.
Two things I bring up on this. Number one, so you're thinking that AJ Hinch, who's the toast of Detroit right now, shouldn't be the manager?
Yeah, I think that the suspensions and the punishment were not sufficient. Now, they were both suspended for a year, so after that, anybody can hire them. I'm just saying initially when they suspended people and they find them draft picks who nobody cares about. They find a billionaire a couple $1 million, and this is cheating. I think this is worse than what Steinbrenner did because it affected things on the field. This is akin to what Pete Rose did.
See, I don't mind that Detroit hired AJ Hinch. I think somebody was going to. Yeah. What I minded in this was that Boston just, as everybody thought they would, just went right back with Alex Cora. Yeah. And maybe they should have been like, that's not a good look for us. Let's get somebody else in here. That's what I don't like.
And the ironic part is Ron Renicky was nominated as one of the 3 managers of the year after he got fired.
And we all knew he was there as a placeholder.
Up for AL Manager of the Year. He won't win it because Cash will win it, but he's one of the 3 finalists.
I actually agree with you, Mike. I thought they should have been far more penalized than they were. But I also, in fairness, I bring up to what's one of the buzz phrases that you hear in the NHL all the time. You ain't cheating, you ain't trying. So.
Yeah.
And you're only cheating if you get caught. Yeah.
It's about going on since time. Franca. It's been going on since time immemorial.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Gotta get to hockey. Yeah.
Okay.
Right, Hello, Hockey World. It is Friday, November 6th, 2020.
I'm Michael Lagello, and is the election over yet?
I'm Jan Levine, and I'm not touching that one at all.
Yes, it is.
I'm Kevin Allen, and I agree with Russ.
Yes, he did. Funny. And I'm Ecklin. You're watching HockeyBuzzcast at HockeyBuzz.com and not watching CNN or Fox or MSNBC or wherever you watch this on. We're not binge watching CNN anymore, which is really kind of funny. You're watching HockeyBuzzcast on HockeyBuzz.com. This is the podcast that comes every Monday through Friday to talk about mostly hockey and fill you in on the comings and goings in the world of such.
Can I just make one political comment because I think people would find it interesting. Whatever they're paying Santorum to be the token Republican on CNN, it's not enough money because he's on a panel with 3 other people who
beat the crap out of him.
Yeah, he's getting paid. So whatever it is, and you know what? I think they're starting to like him.
You know what? I think he's positioning himself pretty nicely for something in the future. To be honest.
Yeah. Well, I just get the feeling that they're starting to like him. That despite the fact they disagree with him politically. At times, they're starting to let up on him a little bit.
My wife spent a week with him one afternoon. He came into my wife's office. They were a startup here, in the local area, and he was when he was running for whatever he was in this area, senator, yeah. And he stopped at the startup, and it was my wife's job to show him around, and she really didn't like him. I just not because of Republican, just personality wise, like one-on-one, he rubbed her the wrong way.
It's funny, Kev, because whatever they're paying him, they have to be paying Donna Brazile who's the former head of the Democratic National Committee. She's the token Democrat on Fox.
Yeah.
And MSNBC doesn't have a token anything. They're just all on one side. But
anyway. I do wish that in hockey we had something like this that was like, we're networked that were so obviously for this or for that, that you could just like, because the most fascinating thing to me is
that's Mike Milbury on the Hockey Night in Canada panel.
Yeah, to a degree, but the fun thing to me is like when something happens, then like after Trump's words that he last night, right? I wanted to see what Fox had to say about that more than I wanted to see what CNN had to say about that because, and I love that you can kind of do that.
I think we did that this morning. We did for a minute, and I said to my wife, I explained what it was like. I said it looked like they were treading water.
I mean, some of them are really good about some of there. You just find that Fox is people all over the map. Like there are some people on Fox which are atrocious. Some of them are actually very good. Let's move on. I do
want to say this. This was shocking. Dana Bash is married to John King, the guy who does divorce. I had no idea. I don't know if anybody knew.
Wow. They've been divorced a while. Yeah.
They were divorced. I didn't even know they were married.
The magic.
They have a child.
We had Carville and Matlin years ago, right? So that was kind of the two diametrically opposed years ago.
And Joe Scarborough is married to Mika Brzezinski.
Right, that we knew though.
And Sean,
I didn't know they were married.
Speaking of Mika Brzezinski, let's talk about Mike Hoffman. That doesn't mean it. There's no.
That was not particularly good segue.
Last night, I received a call from two teams that had been talking to. Well, they were texts. One was a call. One was a text. Doesn't really matter. I'm sorry. I don't know why I cleared that up. No sleep, guys. So I talked to these two people who had said that they were contacted by the people with Hoffman, basically saying we have something, we're ready to do it. Is there a possibility you want to better it? So I think we're close on Hoffman. I wasn't given on the record the team that Hoffman is thinking about doing, but I was thinking about going to. But I do believe that we are looking at around $5 million, and I think that that
on a 1 year deal.
1 year deal, I assume.
1 year deal.
See, I'd be surprised.
Actually, I shouldn't say that. I do not know whether or not no one would clarify whether or not it was a 1, 2, 3 year deal. I'm assuming it's a 1 year deal, but
with the lack of money available out there, I'd be surprised if Hoffman gets 5 simply because, the only teams that can really pay him that, unless other teams are moving other players out, are like New Jersey or Ottawa or
my favorite, my team and
Nashville can pay him that.
Nashville could pay him that, but like we talked about Kevin before, I don't think that's where they're looking.
Colorado, maybe.
But here's the thing that I did some what is the kind of thing I'm sometimes told like Kevin, have you ever been told like find this out someplace else? That concept of like someone says this is what I know, but find it out someplace else before you
get it from somebody else. That's what they say.
Right. So I got to go then. So then you got to call around. It's a good tip, but you can't like go with it until you talk to them. I was told Boston, but find it somewhere else. And then I went to another place, and Boston, was like, I think that's very much a possibility, but there's a couple other options. It's having to do with Chara and things like that going on. But of all the teams, I would say that I was searching into last night, it feels like Boston is probably the most likely. And they have that money. They haven't signed Chara.
Well, Chara doesn't open up a lot of cap space.
But if he goes to Boston,
it opens up some.
That's a good profile place for him to go. He gets some attention there.
Well, plus it takes it full circle. When we started, he was definitely going to Boston, if you remember.
Right.
We said that. So it just takes it back to where, it made some sense, and they wanted some scoring and
So I think it happens this weekend. That's
they have about 7 or so million left to re-sign Chara, but they also have DeBrusque as an RFA. So
that's by far still the strangest story of the off season of why they don't love DeBrusque.
It's got to be something else.
Like what's going on there?
Got to be something beyond what we know.
Well, I think what it is
one other thing to clarify, and then Mike, go ahead. I'm just going to clarify this whole rumor for a second. It is the kind of thing that I think if it happens today or tomorrow. If it doesn't happen by today or tomorrow, then I draw the next conclusion, which is that they were calling these teams bluffing, possibly. Which is always possible to say that. And that's rare when these particular people I was talking to that someone would try to bluff them because. Yeah.
I would say that too. I mean, I've asked people about that, whether that happens, and they said it doesn't, because if you do it one time, you lose the trust of the general managers.
Exactly.
If they find out about it. So I wouldn't guess that was it. I would just say something probably fell apart.
I mean, right now, all the restricted free agents, but we'll talk specifically about DeBrusk and the three guys from Tampa. They have no leverage other than an offer sheet. And we know that offer sheets are not happening. So based on, DeBrusk has scored double figures. He's averaging 20 goals over 3 seasons. He was on his entry-level contract. He probably wants a deal, north of – he probably wants a Konechny type of deal, Russ.
Yeah, I'll tell you. Yeah, I agree. You know what they're looking at? What they're looking at is you have Krejci as a UFA next year. They may want to bring him back. They have Carlo as a RFA next year. McAvoy's an RFA the year after. They don't have a ton of money going forward. They have a lot of money locked up. So they probably look at it and say, we really can't afford him. If he wants to make like $6 million, that's a break point for us.
I mean, and even if it's a bridge deal, I mean, if they do go out and sign a Hoffman, then they don't have any room for DeBrusk. So I mean, so it's either and maybe Chara goes back there making $1 million or $1.5 million in a reduced role. I still don't know whether that's going to happen or not. But I mean, I think DeBrusk is a pretty good player. Maybe they just see him topping out at a certain level and they don't think he'll get any.
They do. There's no question they do. When you talk to people. Yep. And that's fair. And there is a price for him. And because they have that core, and look, Bergeron 22, 23 is going to want to get paid again. They're going to have to pay him too.
Now, there were a couple settlements in arbitration. The first one I want to mention because, maybe I'm wrong, but I've watched Mackenzie Weegar over 2 or 3 seasons whenever the Leafs play the Panthers. He's okay. He's not a bad defenseman, but never somebody who popped. Never somebody who I thought, oh my God, this guy is a diamond in the rough. Well, he gets a 3-year deal at $3.25. And I'm like, wow. I mean, he's a right-handed defenseman. I guess he's more of a stay-at-home guy, but I don't really see a lot there. And he's making over $3 million.
He's one of the few guys Quenneville trusts, though. That's why he's getting it.
Well, the other is, good, Kevin. So I was just going to say, we tend not to, when we've been doing it, I mean, all of us on this panel have been doing this a while. And what we get stuck in is we don't grow our salary cap as it really does. So in other words, like, what's the average salary now? The average salary's got to be 2.6?
Yeah,
7, somewhere like that. So paying him is just a little above average, and though it seems like a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of things, it's really not, incredibly outrageous. Like defensemen, if they have a heartbeat, get $2.5 million.
Yeah, that's really true.
I mean, but I do think he's getting a little more, Kev, because he's one of the few defensemen that played the way Quenneville wanted him to.
And
that's all good. That's what I'm saying. So I mean, it's not like they're giving him 4.25. I guess is the point.
I mean, my opinion is, look, he benefits from the lack of state tax in Florida, right? So he probably would get a little bit more. 3.25, honestly, for 3 years is a heck of a deal for Florida. In my opinion, he deserved in the $4 million range based upon what he brings to the table defensively. I mean, if he had gone in the open market or if he had gotten traded, which had been some of the rumor, he would have been in the mid-4s, Mike. So I think 3.25 is a phenomenal deal for Florida. As a guy who Russ said is probably the one main guy they trust on the blue line defensively. Granted, you have Ekblad, but he's kind of right there. Weegar's a really, really good player. Underrated, very underrated, and guy who would have drawn a ton of interest in the open market.
Yeah,
he definitely would have drawn interest.
I mean, I know that there was talk about the Leafs trading for him, and he's a right-hand shot defenseman, so that the price is always a little elevated for them. The other arbitration settlement was Brendan Lemieux, which we expected 2 years at $1.55 million.
Yep. 1.45 year one, 1.65 year two.
What do you think on that?
A little higher than I would have liked. I was hoping, again, look, his numbers last year were not great by any stretch of the imagination. He clearly played a lot better after he came over from Winnipeg. Did a good job of drawing penalties, but based on his reputation, took a lot of penalties. Provides a little bit of grit on that fourth line if he's in the lineup all the time. I mean, I was hoping in the 1.25 range, but I kind of guesstimated that based upon 1.25 year one, 1.75 year two, 1.5 range seemed reasonable. 2 years as they enabled them also, he'll be left probably unprotected for Seattle. So it could be one of those guys in the expansion draft that goes. Look, if he's able to control the amount of penalties that he takes and dials it down a bit in terms of that, he's a solid guy for the fourth line. He can chip in 10 to 12 goals, probably play 10 away from 12 minutes a game. Won't be a top 6 guy, but could be a third, fourth liner and a kind of guy that the Rangers need from a grit perspective, which is what they lacked last year.
Yeah, I just think if he wants to continue on as a Ranger, he needs to actually listen to his coach. And that's part of, reeling it in. He's got talent, but he's got to listen to his coach, because if he doesn't, then he's not going to be there for that full 2 years.
The guy that I want to talk about his salary is Ryan Strome, and I want to tell you a little story. I talked about the contract with a rival general manager, and I voiced the opinion. It's a guy that I, talk to all the time, and I voiced my opinion that I thought, I'm not sure he's worth that amount of money. Like, I know he had a good season last year, but I don't have a high level of trust. And the GM said, "You're being too hard on him, Kevin. He's actually a little better than that." And I'm actually surprised at that. Jan, I'd love to get your thoughts on that. I just don't have that great trust. Is he the player we saw last year? Because to me, it doesn't feel like he is. He feels like he had a good year.
So I think part of it is we're kind of impacted by his poor play when he first came to the Islanders and then to Edmonton. He clearly was a beneficiary of playing with Artemi Panarin. There's no question about that.
Sure,
right?
That's how I feel. Yeah.
But as we've seen before, not every player can mesh with a superstar and play well, right? We've seen that historically. There are guys, look, Rob Brown is one who basically was on Mario's coattails and had 50-plus goals. Strome is not great defensively, not great between the dots, but he is good offensively. He gives the Rangers a 2C at a relatively reasonable price. Look, I thought the $3.6 million they offered him at was low, and I thought his $5.7 million was high. We knew they'd meet somewhere in the middle. If the arbitrator had ruled, he likely would have gotten higher than the walkaway figure, and the Rangers would have had a call to make. The 2 years enables them, A, to give Filipino another year as a 3C and see if he can move up to a 2C. B, enables them to expose him to Seattle if they want, but if he has a great year, they have him cost-contained for another year. And 3, it also gives them a guy who they know could be their 2C with a guy who's gotten chemistry with Panarin, and maybe he takes a step beyond that from what we've seen. So, look, I thought it was slightly high. I know guys have been on both ends of the spectrum, but Ranger fans would go, God, this was a horrible signing. I know other guys, I have non-Ranger fans going, they thought they'd have gotten him more than $5 million a year based on what he had last year. So I would say it was a tad high, but given all the other factors and given that they stayed below the walkaway figure, he's exposed to Seattle. If he has a good year and they want to trade him, I do think there'll be a marketplace for him at that figure next year because it's not too high. So I think it's a relatively reasonable signing, though. Look, I would have liked other guys as the 2C, but I do think his chemistry with Panarin played a large part in terms of why they ended up re-signing him.
Well, what's interesting about that is by the end of the conversation with the rival general manager, we both agreed that we'd meet at the fact that he's somewhere between a second line center and a third line center. He's a good third line center, but as a second line center, he has deficiencies.
Yeah,
the biggest one being he can't help you other than passing the puck. And as the GM said, on our team, the second center does a lot of the defensive work.
Right. He doesn't do that.
He can't do that.
He's worked a lot on his skating. Like, I've interviewed him a lot over the years, and he's a really good teammate, and he's worked on his skating, and his zone entries are good, and he clicked with Panarin. I still don't think he's going to get more than 50 points this year. But even if they get 50 at this point, even Eric Holla, whoever they'd have gotten on the open market, isn't going to get that. So even though I do think he's overpaid a little bit.
I mean, look at Granlund and
Holla. 2 years, you can overpay anybody.
Right.
Granlund and Holla. Granlund really hasn't played center lately, which I think is a detriment to him. He's been more of a wing. And Holla,
yeah, I'm done with Granlund.
Look, I think we talked yesterday. I think Holla could end up eventually back in Vegas somehow if they really wanted to make that move. But look, I think if you compare and contrast, Kevin Hayes is kind of, I guess, the prototypical number 2C now, right? Because he's good defensively, good between the dots, maybe not as good offensively. He's got 6 more years at $7.1 million versus Strome 2 years at 4.5. As much as I love Hayes, and Hayes is impacted by Kreider taking kind of that salary, give me Strome at 2 years, 4.5, rather than Hayes for 6 years at 7.1. And I love Hayes. I would love a guy who can do all that.
They overpaid too.
And then they deal them after the season potentially.
They had to overpay him. Like basically, Hayes said that he wasn't going there unless he got overpaid, and he did.
Yep.
But just 2 points in all that. Kenny Holland used to say all the time that he said there are players on that I see around the league, and I absolutely hate them at $5 million, but I love them at 3.5.
Yeah, right.
That a lot goes into that, and I think Strome is one of those. But the other point about him is, and I've thought about this, and I wonder how players really feel about this. Strome, as the second center, plays with criticism hanging over him on a regular basis. Yeah. If he's a 3C playing on the Rangers, you absolutely adore him.
Of course.
And so I wonder, some of these guys, do they prefer the pressure and a little bit more money of playing on the second center, or do you want to be that third line center that's putting up points? Everybody's going to say, "Man,
it depends on the guy.
We're set it."
I think knowing these guys, I think hockey players are anybody who's made the NHL has a healthy enough ego that they always think that they're better than.
I think it depends on the guy.
The problem is all 2Cs think they're 1Cs.
Right.
I'll give you an example, and he had a lot of great guy, but he had a lot of criticism heaped upon him in Toronto, and that was Tyler Bozak, because he was basically a 2 or a 3C playing number 1 because they had nobody else, and he was a good assist guy to Kessel. And eventually, when they got Matthews and then they got Tavares, he was playing the role of a third center, and he was really good at that. But then they couldn't afford to pay him that. And then he moved out, and he won a Stanley Cup with St. Louis, playing the same role that he played in Toronto. So, it's all where these guys fit. Nazem Kadri, the same thing. He was a third center in Toronto that 1 year. He goes to Colorado. He's a second line center. He's a better.
First of all, boys and girls, check off your bingo card because Mike has says not Nazem Kadri ready today.
Nazem Kadri.
That's a check mark in the bingo card.
Okay.
So if I could have gotten Kevin Hayes, I was a big proponent when he wanted the $6 million for the 6 years from the Rangers. I was all in. I would have signed him immediately. Granted, that probably would have meant that you lost Kreider or have had to redo that contract, but I was all in on that contract. The fact that he moved away and didn't give it to him, they kind of had a big hole. Did you see that? Nobody expected Strome to fill it. If Hedl proves worthy, I do think you'll see somewhat of a flip-flop during the year at some point in time. But look,
good that you brought up Kreider, though.
Are we going to have a shortened season, right? If we have a shortened season, give me the guy that's gotten the chemistry, because I can't build chemistry in a 48-game season. I can in an 82-game season.
Yeah, the thing that you brought up, Kreider, there are some players, and I've interviewed Kreider a lot, who have the mentality is, just put me out there, whatever line, and I'm going to give you all I have, and I keep trying to get better. He is that kind of guy. I do think Strome handled it very well, so I do think he's that kind of competitor too. But there are guys, Olli Jokinen was not that competitor. He'd much rather be on the second or third line and score your 60 points than being on the top line with criticism, as an example.
Or be on a first line in Florida where nobody's watching him.
Right.
One more.
Let me make 2 points still on these two subjects. Mm-hmm. Number one, the ultimate guy who, sometimes you're just miscast. Like when Robbie Niedermeyer was with Florida, he was a failed performer.
Correct.
He couldn't score, and he was a high draft pick, an early draft pick. And when he couldn't score, and he was constantly saying, what a bust. And then he gets traded, and he goes out west, and all of a sudden he's just the greatest defensive forward in the history of the world. Because he no longer had the stigma of having to be a draft pick that failed. And I've always been sort of fascinated by sometimes just a change of venue really helps you in terms of the perception people have of you. He goes from being a failed bust player to being revered in Anaheim.
Thornton.
Now, the other thing I wanted to bring up, since we're talking about the Rangers, because I think this is interesting. As everyone knows, I write for a betting site, and we did a story about for the futures bet on who has a chance to win the Cup. And I had to list 3, and I went through everybody's odds and everything. And the Rangers are at 25-1 to win the Cup. Now, my argument, I put them in the top 3 value bets. Mm-hmm. Now, the reason I did is I think when you're betting on the future and the history of the NHL, what you know is that it's a wide open tournament. Yeah. The favorites don't necessarily win. And all we got to do is look to the St. Louis Blues in 2019, who were last place in January. The Capitals weren't necessarily the favorites. The Tampa was favorite for a long time. They didn't do it until this year. Right. We have a lot of history that says that. So as much as I love the Colorado Avalanche, they're at I think 15 to 2 odds, which is plus 750.
Right.
I listed the Rangers. I went through every other team, and I compared goalies, offense, potential to be better than they were last year.
Huh?
And I couldn't find anybody in that grouping of teams that I liked better than the Rangers.
Well, what's interesting, Kev, is they did have a rookie goalie once take over the team and win a Stanley Cup. His name is Andy Aikenhead, and it was back in the 20s. So it has happened. So you never know.
And I think, the point I made is their goalie's going to get better every day.
Yeah.
I said they might be this year's Flyers, who's one of the other 3 teams I listed. Because in that group, their odds were attractive to me as well. Because, if you bet 25 to 1, the payoff is going to be huge if for some reason they can do that. Now, I don't mean I'm not suggesting that the Rangers are one of the favorites to win the Cup.
Right.
But I think if you're going to take a chance on someone in that group, they're the best in that group.
I like it.
So I will give you. So the guy I want is Eklund's favorite, and the guy that we've been talking about like crazy, who has yet to sign. They can somehow get Sammy Vatanen on a 1-year deal and put him opposite Jacob Trouba. That's a pretty nice first pairing, and kind of frees up Trouba a little bit to be the kind of player he could be.
Sure.
And that to me would be a really good move for them. I don't think it's going to happen, but if you're looking for a move to make, to me, that's the move that the team would potentially need to make.
The other thing about the Rangers that makes them attractive from the perspective I'm looking at it is they have so many guys who can just show improvement this year and make the team better. Fox, Capo, they're getting this year's Lafreniere, who I talked to a scout recently who said, he will make an impact the first year. He's not going to be a dynamic presence, but he's going to be better than Capo was his first year.
Right. Interesting. Wow.
One more thing we can talk about. Let me just talk about this, and then we can do that.
Yeah.
Kevin, yesterday the NBA and their Players Association agreed on a 72-game schedule to start December 22nd. Pierre LeBrun reported today. Bill Daly says the January 1st puck drop remains our objective, but that the PA and the NHL committee, the return to play committee, they haven't met in person, but there's been daily contact. I mean, I would think that they're going to sort of follow as they normally do the NBA, not December, but they're going to, even if they have to start games in January with no fans, I can't see them going into February and starting. It's probably going to have to be earlier than that because the more games they play, the more money they'll make.
Well, I think now that you know that the NBA is 72, as an example, building availability just changed.
Right.
So they probably do have to start earlier rather than later because, like, as an example, the Flyers and Sixers share the same place.
Yeah.
And now that is going to cause some problems in multi-sport arenas. So,
and by the way, the Toronto Raptors are going to be playing at the Rock.
Oh, they are.
Well,
okay.
Is that confirmed? They hadn't confirmed that. There was an article that The Athletic did that proposed about 8 different spots with
Buffalo
being one of them.
Buffalo was one of them, but they guess they talked to the Blue Jays and they didn't want to do that. But
were they going to play in Buffalo at the university? Like
no, at the KeyBank Center. It's
KeyBank does convert. Okay.
Yeah. But Kevin, what do you think of?
Well, I'm going to actually write a story on this for Hockey Buzz coming up in the next day or so. But it's not true that the more games they play, the more money they make. Simply because if you do the math, with no fans in the building, they really can't make money. Their television contracts, the NFL can play to empty buildings every year and make money because of their television deal. The NBA can do it better than the NHL because they have a better television deal. We get $200 million, for example, from NBC over, split over 31 teams is $6 million per team.
Right.
If you do the amount of money that you owe players over an 81 game schedule, it's $2.1 billion. Mm-hmm. So there's no way to make that up. You divide that by, we know it's $80 million per team. Now, not everybody's going to go there. And here's the other kicker. that a lot of people don't think about, and some of the things that's been brought up to me in discussing this. This average of 80 million that you'll play if there's no fans or that you'll lose, it'll actually be more than that for the weaker teams like the Coyotes and the Panthers, because they don't have revenue streams, and it'll be far less than that for the Rangers and Maple Leafs, because they have things that Nashville and Florida and Anaheim and those cities just simply don't have. So
like building naming rights and things like that.
Well, and their television deals are more lucrative. They share in the commercial rights of the broadcast. Their deals, they get 3 commercials where they get all the money. All those kinds of things. They have more abilities to make money, and so there is some thought that that it would be better for some of these owners if they do play fewer games.
Yeah,
and I think ultimately they're gonna err on the side of doing what's best for the game, but I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that we're gonna play 82 games.
Yeah, I don't think they're playing 82. I never did.
Yeah,
Kevin,
I heard things like 56 and
yeah.
Kevin, do you think the league starts fronting loans to some of these teams?
Yeah, they may have to. Because the issue always in all this, and I remember it was when the Shea Weber signing, and everybody was talking about, whether or not Nashville could come up with the money and matching all that. It was a really big deal. I remember actually having this conversation with you, Eklund, and one of the team owners said, I don't care who you are, including the Toronto Maple Leafs or the New York Rangers. You don't have $13 million or whatever. Was it $26 million?
Yeah.
$6 million. You don't have it in a safe in your office.
No.
He said almost all organizations would have to take out a short-term loan in order to do it. Like it's a cash flow issue. You get all your money in, and then, and a lot of businesses run like that. My son-in-law's family owns a business, and they make all their money in the summer, and then they take out a loan to get them through the winter, and then they pay off the loan with all the money. That's just how it works. So I think that's true for the NHL as well.
The only thing about that, Kev, I agree with everything you said. I think Arizona's a little worse off than that. They're going to need to get fronted. There's no question, because they haven't even paid their rent from last June like that.
Yeah, no, but most of these NHL owners are pretty well heeled. But the reason they're well heeled is they don't do stupid things like losing $1 million in a year. So
exactly.
So,
all right, let's get on.
Part of it may depend as to whether or not they had business interruption insurance. And if they did have it, which a lot of businesses have, depends on the clause in them, right? Because the pandemic is viewed as an act of God in most cases, which means they're not going to get reimbursed. So part of it may depend on the clauses in that contract as to whether or not they can get reimbursed for the amount of time that they missed.
Well, here's the other sad aspect of this story. Each team on game day employs about 500 people.
Yeah,
that's part of their livelihood. You're talking medical personnel, the ambulance people, security, off-duty cops who supplement their income by coming here. And it was explained to me that it's like you're a small village of 17,000 people, and you've got to take care of all those 17,000. So you need enough people to do that. And that's usually about 500 people. And so all that income is being lost for all those people.
Yeah, that's
fans.
That is the same.
Well, it's an interesting part because as you know, Kevin, Russ and I are Mets fans, right? So the first thing Steve Cohen did is restore the salary for those people that were impacted by the pandemic as a goodwill, right? And that's, we'll kind of see when things get back to normal, how quickly teams ramp back up to the normal amount of people who would kind of fill that role within the organizations. And that'll be a good sense as to if they are on solid ground, or even with games resuming, if they're shaky ground in terms of being able from a fiscal perspective.
And normally what happens
I wonder too
is like whenever something like this happens, during the period of time when you're not paying those people, as you get back into real life, the jobs won't be replaced. There will be jobs that you'll just figure out like that we don't need that particular job.
Yeah.
Like
that's what I'm wondering. I saw the story. Russ probably was all over it too. The story about how baseball is downsizing based on this pandemic and getting rid of a lot of older scouts who really have been scouts their whole lives and really don't have anything else to do. I wonder if we may see that in the NHL.
Yeah, I think
it's impossible because here's the scenario I give you. and I hate myself for saying it, but the fewer games that are being played, the less they need some of those guys, because they could just have some of those guys work video and cover it. Because if there's no games to see, or not a lot of games to see, they're going to start looking at things like travel and everything and seeing what they can save. That's going to be a fact, and I hate it. Ugh.
Of course. All right, let's do this quickly. I want to finish our last division here. What we've been doing this week is we've been, in honor of the election, we've been looking back and asking the question: are you better off than you were 4 years ago? All right. And today's question. So today we're going to go through the Pacific Division, the Central Division, and so I'm going to paint you the picture for each of these teams, and you guys are going to decide whether or not they're better off than they were 4 years ago. So that means we're looking at the end of the 2015-16 season, heading into the 16-17 season. All right, and we're going to start today with Chicago Blackhawks. All right, the Blackhawks 2015-16 finished third in the division with 103 points. By the way, the Central Division this year, 7 of the 8 teams finished 500 or above. The Central Division was amazing in 15-16. Only the only team that didn't was 2 games under 500, which was the Winnipeg Jets. All right, so the Chicago Blackhawks, third, 103 points. They lost to the second place Blues, who had 107 points. They had to meet a 107-point team, 103-point team met in the first round of the playoffs.
Yeah, Game 7. Went to Game 7.
The Game 7, Blues and Chicago Blackhawks. So after that season, what they decided to do was their only summer signing that summer was that was of any significance was Brian Campbell for 1 year, $1.5 million. And they made 2 trades to clear space because they only got draft picks back for both of them. They traded Andrew Shaw to Montreal for 2 second-round draft picks, and they traded Teravainen and Bickle to Carolina for a second and a fifth.
Yeah, they traded the draft picks for them to take Bickle because Bickle's contract was crushing them.
Right. No coaching changes. The best draft pick they had in 2016 was one Alex DeBrincat.
Yeah.
Rounder, I think.
Oh yeah. Russ and I remember it well.
Oh yeah, we argued with the guy. I don't want to say who the guy was, but yep.
So before I tell you what 2016-17 results were, somebody suggests I should do it this way. I like the idea. I'm going to ask you right now, going into 2016-17 and going into 2020-21, are the Chicago Blackhawks better off than they were 4 years ago, Kevin?
They're worse off now.
They're worse off. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because they have issues with contracts with 2 defensemen, obviously Duncan Keith and Seabrook, that are causing them issues.
Yeah.
Their captain wasn't notified that they were going into a rebuild. They don't have any goaltending to speak of. They got some good young players, but they seem to be a team that we don't quite know where they're going to be in the next couple of years.
Totally agree.
Had they re-signed Crawford, I think you could make an argument that they were basically on par because they lost in the first round in 2016 and they lost in the first round this year. But since they have Malcolm Subban and Colin Delia as their goaltending tandem for next year, and they basically had to give away Oli Mata for nothing because they could afford to keep him, and they still have to sign Dylan Strome. I think they're worse off.
Yeah, so we'll go with Jan and Russ the next one so we can move along quickly here. But I said no, we agree. They were still a very good team. Now in 2016-17, they finished first in the division and the conference the following year, but were swept by the Predators in round 1. So we all remember that very well. That was a crazy thing where
national sweep. Yeah.
Yeah, when the Preds were coming down the stretch, and I remember doing the matchups, and the Preds have to avoid the Hawks at all costs, and they ended up getting the Hawks and ended up sweeping them. Next up, Colorado Avalanche. This was a crazy offseason for the Colorado Avalanche. All right, 2015-16, they finished 6th in the division. They missed the playoffs. Summer signings. They signed 10 UFAs on July 1st. 10 UFAs on July 1st. Not big names, but 10 UFAs. The 2 biggest names, Joe Colburn, a 2-year, $5 million. 2 years, $5 million.
That aged well.
Yeah, and Fedor Chutin, 1 year, a 1 year, $2 million deal. They also did resign Nathan McKinnon in the summer to what was an unbelievably reasonable contract.
Well, he was coming off an average year, and that
7 years, $44 million.
Yeah, they were very fortunate on that deal.
Very fortunate. No big trades were made. However, on August 11th, Patrick Waugh resigns over dispute about him and having personnel decisions. Remember this whole thing?
Oh yeah.
Yep.
He
He
threw
wanted
a
to be the
tantrum.
GM also.
Yeah, the straw that broke the camel's back was reportedly that Waugh wanted to trade for Jonathan Duran, who was traded that same summer to Tampa.
Montreal. Yep.
To Montreal, right, from Montreal. To Montreal. And so this is like August 11th. Really was a crazy time. He was replaced by Jared Bednar. Their first-round draft pick, their best first-round draft pick, Tyson Yost.
Yeah, who's a good player for them.
Still a good player, yeah. And
well, obviously, them being one of the favorites for the Stanley Cup, they're a lot better off than they were 4 years ago. But they did finish like with one of the worst records in the history of the NHL the following year because Bednar came in like 3 weeks before training camp and they weren't prepared. But he's proved to be a pretty good coach.
He is. It was unfair. That whole thing was unfair, and obviously they're better. While the whole tantrum thing that didn't shock me. I mean, he is a good coach. He is, because I witnessed him being a good coach in junior hockey, but the fact that he thought he could control personnel, that wasn't going to last long.
Yeah, no, I don't think so either. Dallas Stars are next. We're doing this alphabetically. Only an exhibition, not a competition. Please, no wagering. All right. The Dallas Stars finished first in the division and the conference this year, actually, in 2015. First in the division and the conference. I didn't really remember that they were that good in 2015-16. They had 109 points. The playoffs, they beat the Wild in 6 games in the opening round, but then lost to the Blues in Game 7 in a battle between like the 2 top teams in the Western Conference in the second round. The Blues, it was a crazy Blues. The Blues had talk about a tough road. The Blues had a tough road there.
In a series between the 2 coaches that really love each other, Lindy Ruff and Ken Hitchcock.
Yeah, that was fun. So when going into the summer, a disappointment, they made only one major signing, 2 years, $7.5 million for Dan Hamhuis.
Mm-hmm.
And then we talk about the summer, and I'm going to do a blog, Mike, you inspired me yesterday, as the worst UFA season ever for a signing of the players that were an unbelievable amount of terrible deals were signed in the summer of 2016. But they also re-signed Jamie Benn for 8 years, $76 million. And then as far as trades go, they traded away Goligoski's negotiating rights to the Coyotes, which is interesting when you think about it. They signed Dan Hamhuis and traded away Goligoski's negotiating rights.
Because Goligoski wanted more than 5.
He wanted a lot more money, and Hamhuis is a good puck mover. It's not like Goligoski was putting up like a ton of points. He's putting up points, but
right. They also traded goalie Jack Campbell to the Kings for Nick Hebert. Nick Ebert. Sorry, Ebert. No coaching changes. Of course, they're a pretty darn good team. Why would they change coaches? And Riley Tuff, their best draft pick.
He's still around. He's one of those bigger guys. He's like 6'4", 220. In a year or two, he could make it, and he could be a bottom pairing guy, bottom 6 guy. But he's super strong and good around the net.
Kevin,
an interesting one. Are they better? Are they better heading into this season than they were heading into 2016-17?
Boy, it's actually quite close, I think, because Ben and Sagan were younger then.
Yeah.
And, now they're getting older. But I'd say when you come off getting to the final, even with the injury to Sagan and the fact that they have the Heiskanen and I'd say they're better off now, but I not significantly.
They've got that trio on the blue line: Lindell, Berg, and Heiskanen. They've got a good group of young forwards who are second, third liners. Hintz and Gurianov. Right. Where I'm worried about is obviously the injury to Sagan. He's probably not going to be back until like midway through the season. Bishop, and so it's going to be back on. I'm drawing a blank to go on the
Goldman, yeah.
Right.
But the real concern is Jamie Benn. I mean, he had a playoff where he was very effective, but the last couple seasons he's dropped off, and he really had started to show his age. And that contract, I think he's got 4 or 5 more years at $9.5 million. That's going to be a crippler.
I'll add one more to the list. We saw a ton from Joe Pavelski in the playoffs, and not a heck of a lot during the regular season. Given how competitive the Central might be, depending on the playoff structure, with Sagan out, somebody's going to have to step up. Maybe it's a guy like Foxa who steps up.
Yeah.
Maybe it's coming back to the playoffs, but you need to get a lot more from Pavelski during the regular season to make up for the absence of Sagan. And the question is, does Pavelski really still have that in him over the course of a long season?
The only thing I'd say is I think they're on par because Hudobin is still a step down from Bishop, even though he made it to the Stanley Cup. And I don't know if Bishop even comes back from this. He's had so many injuries, and now his hips are going bad. Like, this doesn't look good.
Yeah, and Khudobin, actually, I went and looked this up to make sure I was right. Khudobin has never been a number one goalie.
No.
Yeah, never been a number one goalie. Is that crazy?
Jake is going to get some work this year.
All right, what did they do in 2016-17? Do you remember this?
No.
They didn't do well. I think that was when things started going bad for him.
We talked the other day about the Edmonton Oilers. They were 30 points better in 2016-17 than they were 15-16. Well, those 30 points came from the Dallas Stars, who were 30 points worse.
Yeah.
They had 79 points in this. They went from 109 to 79 points, and they finished sixth in the Central in 2016-17. Massive.
That was when Hitch, remember, he wasn't relating to his players anymore. Like, it was starting to go bad. Nishushin, he outrighted him. Like, there was a lot of things going on there.
A lot of problems.
And a lot. When did they hire Montgomery? The year after?
The year after, I think. Yeah.
Year after, yeah.
All right, Minnesota Wild are next. In the 2015-16, they finished fifth in the division, 87 points. They lost to Dallas in the first round, the playoffs in 6 games. So they went into the summer, and their signings were Eric Stahl for 3 years, $10.5 million.
Great sign.
A great sign. And a sneaky little signing of Alex Stalock. 1 year, $650K.
That's an amazing signing now, if you look at it.
1 year, $650K. Yeah, Alex Stalock signing there. They didn't make any trades that summer, really. They didn't make a coaching change. However, Mike Yao would be fired in February of 2017 and replaced by Bruce Boudreau. But they didn't make any changes. Their best draft pick was Luke Kunin.
Yep. Yeah, he just got traded.
Man, I'm bad at pronouncing.
That's all right.
Sorry about that. Really, sleep would be good. So are they better off? Brass, I'll give you this one. Better off or worse off now heading into this?
I think they're on par. I mean, I do think there's a real good chance they can make the playoffs, but they do have aging parts. I do like Stalock. Who else did they get in net? I forget now.
Talbot, 3-year deal.
Talbot. So they still have a decent enough goaltending tandem and good defense. I still think their defense is really solid, and Suter plays a lot of minutes. So I'm going to say they're on par, but I still think there's a little upside there.
I'm going to say they're better now, simply because Bill Guerin recognized that he had to change the culture. Yeah. And he's dramatically trying to change that. He aggressively tried to trade Parisi, and so I'm just going to say they're better off. But I don't disagree with Russ's analysis. He's right on. But if I was the owner of the Minnesota Wild, I'd be more pleased where I'm at now than where I was then.
Yeah, Kaprizov's got to score 25 goals, or otherwise it's going to be a problem.
Right. I was going to say Kaprizov could be the most dynamic offensive guy that they've had since Marian Gaborik.
Yeah.
Well, that'll be fun to watch. The Nashville Predators are next. 2015-16. They finished fourth in the division with 96 points. In the playoffs, they beat Anaheim in the first round of the playoffs, which was a really big deal. Remember, that's the 7-game series. Anaheim was one of the best teams out there. They beat Anaheim in 7 games. They lost in the second round of the playoffs to the Sharks in 7 games. Their 2016 signing, here was a really sneaky good one. 1 year, $575,000 for Matt Irwin. Interesting, right? Interesting signing there.
Wow, that's stunning.
Yeah,
but he played minutes.
I'm just kidding. Just joking.
Yeah. They re-signed Peter Forsberg, 6 years, $36 million.
Sorry,
not Peter Forsberg.
God. Martin Erat right now is basically cursing at you also.
I was laughing.
They made a small little trade by moving Shea Weber to Montreal for PK Subban. That was a little trade they made there. Their 2 draft picks that they had were kind of interesting. Dante Fabro,
who's a mainstay for them now,
and Samuel Girard, who
mainstay for
Colorado now.
In Colorado now, yep. Kevin, I like you with the Preds for sure. Are they better off?
They're worse off now.
I think
they just don't know where they're going. They only have 4 forwards right now are penciled in for their top 6 forward spots. They've got Duchesne and Johansson in long-term contracts. Neither one of them have lived up to those, contracts. Back then they were, headed toward the Stanley Cup Finals. We didn't know that, but they were a team that was considered on the rise. Right now, they're a team that feels a little rudderless, and they got two goalies, and Rene's at the end of just a great career, but he's near the end. Of Fabro, the guy you just talked about, they were disappointed, and that he wasn't quite as disappointed might be the wrong word. They discovered he wasn't nearly as ready as they had hoped he would be. And they just didn't have the same level of confidence like they feel going forward. He'll be fine, but he wasn't quite ready. So, yeah, I think they got trouble there.
Yeah, I mean, do you think they'll retire Pekka Rinne's number?
Yeah, they should.
Yeah, he's the most popular player in their history.
Yeah. You know what it feels like? It feels like even though he wasn't this type of goalie, Rene feels like he's like the last of like the stand-up goalies when stand-up goalies were out of the league now.
Yeah.
And he's hanging on for that last year because he was always a little different than every other goalie, whether you want to call him a butterfly or a hybrid, whatever. But he just feels like he's the last of that type.
Let me ask this question because, I mean, you look at the way that they're structured right now with Johansson and Duchesne and now Ellis and Yossi all on long-term deals.
Yep.
And I look at this team and where they are, and I'm like, this is a team that needs a rebuild or a reset. But those long-term contracts, they really can't do it, Kev.
Well, but there's really no reason to rebuild with Yossi and Ellis. They can't do a Toronto Maple Leaf style strip it down to the chassis, but they could go down and keep Yossi and Ellis and build around. They got three really good defensemen.
Yeah.
And you can build around that. They're high on that minor league defense.
David Farrance.
Yeah.
Oh well, no. I was talking about the other defenseman. Farrance is terrific. I'm high on him. But yeah, you're talking about.
They're the goalie that I can never remember his name.
Oh,
he was here.
I know who you're talking about.
They got him in a trade.
Connor Ingram.
Yeah. They're really high on him. They don't think their prospect group is as strong as it's been in the past. So, I think they're one of those teams that are in danger of just kind of falling off the cliff here this year.
They need the only hope they have, I think, is that because they have the older group. They got that like typical model of an older group of players that are good enough to do something significant with them. If they get the younger group in there that aren't making a lot of money, they could put that good thing together in the playoffs. Still, that's their hope. I think they have to have that younger group match the older group.
Did they sign Farrance? I think they did, right?
I think so.
Yeah, if they did, he's going to have a chance to make that team. He is a dynamic defenseman.
Moving on to the St. Louis Blues, 2015-16 record. Second in the Central, 107 points. They lost in the conference final to the Predators. Their summer signings: the great Carter Hutton, 2 years, $2.25 million.
Best color commentator in the league.
And David Perron, 2 years, $7.5 million.
That's a great signing because we all thought the post-concussion was going to kill his career, and boy.
It turned out to be something pretty significant. They re-signed Jake Allen, 4 years, $17.4 million in that summer. They didn't make any big trades. They didn't make any coaching changes. Their best draft pick was Tage Thompson, who is still a factor.
I mean, they moved him in the Ryan O'Reilly deal.
Right. So before we get into how they did 2016-17, are they better off now than they were 4 years ago? Jan, why don't you take this on?
I mean, granted, what we know in hindsight, what ended up becoming, obviously the answer has to be no. I mean, they clearly took a step back. There's questions whether or not Jordan Binnington was just a flash in the pan goalie for that 1 year. They've kind of lost a little bit of the buffer they had behind him in Allen, who they moved to Montreal.
Yeah.
So I do think that, look, if Binnington recoups the form that he showed 2 years ago, I think St. Louis does have enough talent, either with losing Pietrangelo, with adding Krug, that they still could maybe be a difference maker in the Central and make a run. But I think broadly, without that happening, you'd have to say they're a little bit worse than they were 4 years ago.
Yeah, I would say that. I'm just running out of time here. I want to get to Winnipeg real fast.
I would just say they're on par. I think they're on par, honestly.
Let's go to Winnipeg then. Winnipeg, 2015-16, finished 8th in the division. They were last place in this division that year. They didn't make the playoffs, of course. Their big signings were John Matthias, 2 years, $4.25 million. And they also re-signed Mark Scheifele, 8 years, $49 million. They didn't make any trades or coaching changes. Shoveldayev didn't do a whole lot that year. They had two pretty good draft picks though, Patrick Laine and Logan Stanley. Are they? So now looking, this is a tough one, Kevin.
And Logan Stanley's teetering now. The speed factor is caught up to him, where he may not make it.
They're a much better team. You know, they first of all, they were last in the division that year and had the second pick in the draft, but they're better now because they have a star number one goaltender in Hellebuck, whereas at that point they were splitting duty between Pavlik, Hellebuck, and Michael Hutchinson. So they have an established number one. Their defense is not as strong as it was a couple years ago with Trouba and Bufflin, but their forwards are really good. So they're a playoff team, but they have holes.
They're better for sure right now. They have more talent. But, I'm going to say about them what I said when, for about 2 seasons before they traded O'Reilly and Buffalo. I don't know why they're considering trading Patrick Laine. I mean, guys like him don't come along, and you got to figure out a way to make it work. Because I get that he's one-dimensional, but it's a great dimension. So I think they shouldn't trade him.
Eck, we can't hear you.
Hold on, Eck. You're muted. You muted yourself.
I know I did. I muted myself, which is always a good idea. I do that every day when I wake up. All right. Remember, see you guys have a great weekend. Remember, without the buzz, it is just hockey. Enjoy your beautiful out here.